am live. I'm reading The Laird and the Lady. It is a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. She was a writer of her own farm memories. She wrote 7 books on her previous incarnations, passed away in 1989. This book was published in 1949 and it is her one and only novel she wrote. It is a story about Rowan and Marylda. Started in a French chateau. They are now married and live in a Highland castle called Cloud, and Marylda is going through a lot. We are on chapter 13, Ghost Story. "It's going to work," said Marylda, "but don't write anything down yet. This is only the preliminary stage. I'll try to tell you my reactions." Rowan leant forward, alert for any change in the tone of her voice which would warn him if she became distressed. "There are so many pictures that it's difficult to get them into focus. It's like looking at something very intently and then shutting your eyes. I seem to be looking through my forehead, though that doesn't explain it properly either. Don't worry about the technique, darling. Concentrate on Hector. But don't think of the time when he went down into the hide. Skip that sequence and find out what he did after the others had gone to bed. He's unlocking the drawer of a desk. I think it's the same one that is now in Georgina's sitting room, the bottom drawer on the right-hand side. He's taking money, gold money, out of the drawer and counting it, sovereigns, 200 sovereigns. He needs to bribe Gaston. He goes out of the postern door towards the stables. Gaston slept over the saddle room. He shakes Gaston by the shoulder to wake him. Gaston is a small, dark man with a waxed moustache. He is frightened because Hector is accusing him of having stolen a diamond brooch from Emilie. Hector wanted to accuse him when the brooch was missing, but Emilie wouldn't let him. He said the police have found out and are coming in the morning to take him to prison. Gaston admits it and is imploring Hector to protect him. Hector is pretending that the crime is too serious. Gaston is sobbing. He looks ludicrous, groveling on the floor with his hairy legs showing under his nightshirt. Then he seizes Hector's hand and kisses it. He has been told that he shall be given money and the car to make his getaway. Hector says that he won't be able to delay the police more than a few days, so Gaston had better drive to Glasgow and get on a boat to Canada. He says Gaston must get rid of the car, for the police would never believe he had been allowed to take it. Hector adds that if the car is traced, he will have to say that it was stolen. Otherwise, it would be proof that he had aided and abetted a crime. She dropped the scandoo on the floor, and when Rowan went to pick it up, she waved him away. "I don't need that any longer." Hector is throwing clothes, Emilie's clothes, into a suitcase. Now he's putting her toilet things into her dressing bag. It is made of crocodile and the fittings are gold. He's beginning to find it difficult to think clearly. He must be sure to get the details right. What would she take with her if she was really eloping? He runs upstairs and gets another suitcase. No, it's a Glaston bag. He bundles her peignoir into it and 4 nightgowns. He's afraid that they will be suspicious if she leaves out something she would be sure not to have forgotten. Her sable coat, she would never have left that behind. He takes it out of the wardrobe. It is in a muslin bag which frightens him because it looks like a body hanging in a shroud. He looks down at his wrist and sees a fleck of blood on the lace ruffle. A little blood ran out the corner of Emilie's mouth when he was carrying her down the hide. He wrenches the lace from his shirt sleeve and tries to wash it with a ewer in his dressing room. But there is still a brownish stain. He starts quoting Lady Macbeth. "Out, damned spot." He stares round the bedroom, wondering what he has left undone that can betray him. It is now he decides that everything belonging to Emilie shall be put away in the old nursery. He didn't do it only to protect the hide. It was so that Georgina shouldn't be able to check on what Emilie was supposed to have taken with her. There was a long pause. "What did he do with the luggage?" prompted Rowan. "He hid it under the hay in the great barn. The following night he took it out to the lily loch. He weighed it with stones so that it would sink deep into the mud. Slow bubbles rose to the surface as though someone was drowning. Ripples spread across the moonlit water and reminded him of how he had swum there with Emilie. He imagined that he could see her among the lily leaves." "How soon did he really see her?" She sounded like a child answering a question in school. "Standing beside the gates. She was admiring them, feeling proud that she had insisted on bringing them from Italy. But he thought she was mocking him. He had forgotten that he had seen her like that on the day the gates were hung. Robbie was one of the men who carried them to the loft in the great barn. Hector said it was done because the hinges were too frail to support their weight, but he thought everyone knew that the rust stains in the stone pillar reminded him of blood. Emilie had always been afraid of blood, and he had laughed at her for being squeamish. He noticed a brown mark on the white owl that Emilie had had stuffed. He knew with his mind that it was only one mold. He knew in his mind that it was only mold, but every time he saw it, he remembered the stain of blood on lace, the lace ruffle he had burned because he couldn't wash away the blood. He's getting terribly afraid when he goes through the beech wood, because the dead leaves are the color of old blood, afraid of the river in Spate, because it is the same color, afraid of the heather when it begins to rust in autumn. "You're going too fast," Rowan interrupted, trying to bring her back from this concentration on fear. "He married Georgina in June. Why did he marry her?" "Because he was afraid to be alone. No, that wasn't the only reason. He saw Emilie admiring herself in a long mirror of her wardrobe. She was thinking that no one could guess that she was pregnant. She was running her hands over her belly, pleased that she lived at a time when women wore corsets. But Hector thought she had come back to tell him that he had not only killed her, but also his child. He thought she was laughing because she was strong enough to break 300 years of the succession of Cloud from father to son. He thought that she was sure that no woman would marry a murderer, and that he would die without issue. He got very drunk that night and stood with a glass of whiskey in his hand before the Cadry family tree. It used to hang in the library, and swore that he would live until his son was born. Emilie wasn't at all interested in the family tree, so she wasn't there, but he thought she was mocking him because he had not been able to forget her, even though her name was now scored out with heavy black lines. Most of the other Cadry women had their coats of arms in the glass windows of the banqueting hall. Emilie put a pig surrounded by sprigs of parsley in one of the panes for the Blackensop arms, but it isn't there anymore. Hector broke it and threw the splinters of coloured glass in the river. "How did he fake the evidence of Emilie's death?" said Rowan, who was finding it difficult to write fast enough to keep up with what she was saying, and so did not notice that she was finding it increasingly hard to maintain a measure of detachment. "I'm not quite sure. There's something about a letter. Yes, I've got it now. A friend of Hector's, someone he had known in his bachelor days, wanted an alibi, so he sent a letter written by himself to be posted in the village here, so that his father would think he was at Cloud instead of at Monte Carlo. That gave Hector the idea of sending this man several letters to post in Paris. He made the excuse that he wanted certain people to think that he had gone abroad for a few weeks. He addressed one of the envelopes to himself, saying that he didn't trust him to remember to post the letters unless he had proof they had not been forgotten. He deliberately disguised his handwriting. The friend had never had a letter from him before. They didn't know each other very well. The other letters were addressed to people Hector had never met, and there was only a sheet of blank paper inside, so they couldn't be traced back to him. "Why did he address one to himself?" said Rowan, who had forgotten this detail of Georgina's story. "He took a long time to write it. I can see him in the library, late at night. The floor is covered with sheets of writing paper, thin paper on which he is writing with purple ink. It is in French, and he has to look up many of the words in the dictionary. It is supposed to be from the proprietor of a little hotel in Montmartre." the kind of place to which Emilie might have drifted after Gaston deserted her, taking the emeralds with her, and any money she had left. It said that an English lady who appeared to be very distressed had spent 3 nights in the hotel and then disappeared, and had not returned either to pay the bill or collect her luggage. The proprietor had to pay the bill or collect her luggage. The proprietor had waited for a week in case she came back. Then he searched her room to find the address of someone with whom he could get in touch. He had found a torn envelope on the floor which was addressed to Sir Hector Cairdry. Could Sir Hector give any clue as to the lady's identity, and if so, advise as to what steps should be taken? I'm giving a free translation. It's difficult to get the exact wording because Hector was agitated when he wrote it, and even more so when Georgina read it over his shoulder. He made sure that Georgina would be at Cloud when the letter arrived. Georgina thought he was so upset because he had always hoped Emilie would come back to him. But it was really that he thought she would recognize the characteristic way he wrote his capital M's and would guess the letter was a fake. Georgina looked flurried because she was feeling guilty for hoping that Emilie had committed suicide. Georgina helped him pack his bag and drove him to the station in a dogcart. Hector didn't buy another car, for cars always reminded him of Emilie. In Paris he went to the Ritz, because he couldn't think of the name of any other hotel. When the driver of the fiacre asked him where he wanted to go, he was given the same rooms he had shared with Emilie on their honeymoon. She happened to be there too, because Paris was one of the favorite places in her narrow heaven. She was lying on the chaise-longue by the fire, wearing the negligee she had kept as memento. He ran out of the room and went to a brothel to try to forget, but the girl who took him up to her room was also called Emilie. She stared at him in amazement when he threw a fiver on the dressing table and fled down the stairs. She laughed as she watched him go, then shrugged her shoulders and hid the money in the top of her stockings. It was raining, but he wandered through deserted side streets, because he dared not go back to the Ritz. At dawn he wrote a note in a bistro, enclosing money to pay his bill and saying that his luggage must be given to the bearer. I think it was a porter from one of the markets. He found a seedy little hotel on the left bank beyond Notre Dame. He wanted to be able to go to the morgue without having to take a cab. He thought everyone might be a potential spy. He threw himself down on the bed and slept for 2 or 3 hours. I'm not sure if he was too exhausted to undress, or if it was because the sheets were grey with dirt. He knew that he ought to eat something to stop him feeling faint, but he revolted against food and took black coffee and cognac instead. He wondered if he dared risk there being a body which he could reasonably identify as Emilie without going to the morgue among the sightseers, but decided it would be too dangerous. There were even children among the people who stared avidly through the plate glass windows at the corpses that were displayed on the marble slabs. Some of the bodies looked as though they had been dead for a long time. He hurried past a Negro who had cut his throat, an old woman whose lips were hideously burned by the acid she had drunk, a man who had been pulped by a fall from a high building. There was a woman's body. She had dark hair, but her features were too bloated to be recognizable. He thrust his way through the press of people who stared at him and muttered resentfully. Now I can see him entering a large building. I think it is a police station. Yes, he's talking to a gendarme who listens sympathetically. He keeps on thinking how differently the man would have behaved if he knew he were talking to a murderer. Now he is sitting opposite an older man in blue uniform. It is the chief of the arrondissement. Hector says he received a letter saying that his wife was missing, but there was no address, only the postmark. The official insists on giving him a glass of brandy and then scribbles a few lines on a sheet of paper. It is an authorization for Hector to go to the morgue, even though it is now too late for it to be open to the public. Hector does not tell him he has already been there. At the morgue there is an official who attends to the people who come to identify the bodies. He's a fat man with a red face and ginger whiskers. He looks like a prosperous butcher. He takes Hector into a dusty office and runs his finger slowly down a list of dates and descriptions in a ledger. He asks whether the missing lady had false teeth. No? Then perhaps she was a blonde or had a toe broken on the left foot. He asks Hector to understand that it is difficult to give a more accurate description when bodies have been in the water for some time. Is Monsieur perhaps looking for a young woman about 25 years of age with dark hair? It is almost certain that her hair was dark. Well nourished, though Monsieur will understand that it is impossible to be more precise, for the sea and the Seine, for the fish in the Seine are as hungry as those of the sea. She has been here over 3 weeks. Would that agree with the period which Monsieur investigates? Hector almost refuses to view the body. The guardian of the morgue takes his arm as they walk down a dank passage. It is obvious that he is so familiar with the ritual that it means even less than it would be to an undertaker. He points out a mole on the right shoulder of the bloated corpse. Hector turns away and retches. So Monsieur has recognized his poor wife, says the guardian with practiced sympathy. Hector realizes that the man is mildly amused that the cold English can display so much emotion. Hector knows someone in the British Embassy. He sends a note outlining the circumstances, asking them to arrange for the burial. Now he's standing by the grave while a chaplain hurries through the burial service. He wonders whether the girl he is burying is a Catholic. If so, will she also return to haunt him, because he has buried her in a Protestant cemetery? He has brought an enormous wreath of white roses and lilac. The man from the embassy thinks this is because he loved his wife. Hector knows it is really a pathetic bribe to the unknown, who is helping him to maintain the deception by which the continuity of Cloud shall be protected. She broke off and opened her eyes. There's a lot more, but I'm running out of energy. Give me some brandy. Her voice was too authoritative for Rowan to protest that she had already done enough for one evening. He flexed his fingers, which ached with the strain of writing so fast, watched her empty the glass and relax again with the rug drawn more closely around her. Ask me a question, she said commandingly. I've lost the thread. Was he really in love with Georgina? Yes, so he felt even more guilty, because he never dared to tell her so. He thought that if he loved Georgina enough and they were married, that Emilie might lose her power over them. He never realized that Emilie wasn't trying to haunt them. He often saw her because he was thinking of her so much and had the sight. She was nearly always laughing when he saw her because she didn't want to remember anything except the times when she was happy. So he thought she was mocking him. That's why he sent all her money back to the Blackensops, because he thought that she was scornful, because he still needed it. The reason he often saw her in the new wing was because she enjoyed planning how it should be finished. But he thought she was angry because the workmen were dismissed the day after she was supposed to have run away. He saw her playing croquet several times. He had the lawn ploughed up, and then at midnight of the full moon he crept out of the house and sowed it, all with salt. He thought it was a ritual against ghosts. When did he brick up the turret stair? After he married Georgina. 2 or 3 days before Emilie died, she had been up to the old nursery to decide how it should be redecorated. She wouldn't make up her mind whether to choose Kate Greenaway figures or a Noah's Ark frieze, so she quite often ran up the stairs to look at the room. Hector thought she couldn't get past the new wall, but the only reason she didn't use the stairs again was that she was bored with the idea of having the room painted. Emilie was very easily bored. She was often in her bedroom because it was the place she found most attractive. She would have been amused to see Georgina in a flannel nightgown, but she had no knowledge that her husband had married again. That is one of the reasons why Hector couldn't make love properly to Georgina. He knew that Emilie might be sitting in front of the dressing table, brushing her hair or putting perfume behind her ears. When did he decide to commit suicide, said Rowan, scribbling so fast that his right hand felt as though it was going to fall off at the wrist. When his hatred of Emilie became more real than his love for Georgina. I think it was because it was about 2 months before his child was to be born. He thought Emilie would haunt them too until she drove them all mad. He wasn't mad, but he thought his brain was slowly rotting with fear. That's why he drank so much whiskey, to make him bold enough to fight against fear. But of course it only made it easier for him to see her. But he knew it was cowardly to commit suicide. If he proved himself a coward, how would he be able to fight for his wife and his son? If Georgina had had a daughter, he would have fought on alone until there was a new chief of Cloud to succeed him. That's why he found it so difficult to smile when Georgina insisted on blue ribbons for the Laird. Pink for a daughter would have given him another lease of life. He couldn't face Emilie until he had paid his debts. He believed she would demand more than the repayment of money with which at first he had hoped to placate her. He used to read the Bible only one line, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And then he would stand in front of the family tree and swing round suddenly as though Emilie was waiting behind him and cry out, "God damn you! The sins of the fathers shall not be visited on the children." But Emilie wasn't there. She had never liked the library. She objected to the smell of cigar smoke. Her voice took on a note of more urgent emotion. Hector dared not challenge Emilie until he had paid all his debts. She would never be able to taunt him for having tried to escape punishment according to the law. "But he didn't confess," said Rowan, too intent on his notebook to look up from the page of almost illegible writings. "The law. I mustn't escape the law. I will pay all my debts. Roderick, I wish you to come with me to the fealty stone. Roderick, you are the master of Cairdry until my son is born. Roderick, put your right hand on our stone and give the oath. Remember that if you break your oath or speak of what you must do in its fulfillment, then each day which brings you nearer to midsummer will dawn in fear." He waited for the next phrase and in the silence heard her sobbing. "Don't ask me to do any more, not yet. Please, Rowan, don't let me see any more. I'm sorry to be a coward, but the fear is so strong. The fear." Oh, this was the end of chapter 13. The chapter 14 is entitled Spring Cleaning.